guys, this is a segment from the Slumpbuster Podcast. You can find the full episode on any of the various podcast platforms, or, of course, subscribe to us on YouTube for more of our content. Other than that, guys, sit down, bust a slump, and enjoy. Is Khabib the GOAT? Let's start things off.
Yeah, so I guess to answer that question, in my opinion, Khabib Nurmagomedov is the greatest of all time. And here's my sort of argument for why he is the GOAT. Above Jon Jones, above Anderson Silva, above GSP, above everybody else, he by far is the GOAT. When you look at dominance, just sheer dominance, right? Khabib only ever lost arguably 2 rounds. So he did for sure lose 1 to Conor McGregor in that McGregor fight, which we all know what happened to McGregor. And then he arguably lost the first round of Justin Gaethje. I'd have to take a look at the actual scorecards. But even that one is arguable. Other than that, he's never had a close fight, right? It's always been pure domination no matter what it is. And when it comes to MMA, really, domination is, can I impose my will on you, whatever style it is. The thing that's cool about MMA is that you have so many options, right? You've got guys that are good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who can maybe beat some of your strikers, or you've got some really good strikers that, you know, can beat some of those grapplers by keeping them at bay, keeping things standing, avoiding the takedowns, whatever. You have wrestlers that can take you down, grind it out. And there's always this mixed match of styles, right? If we think about sort of the triangle of Miesha Tate, Holly Holm, and Ronda Rousey, right? There's always this mismatch of styles. And usually there's always going to be a style that can beat another style. It's just going to happen. But with Khabib, his style was so dominant, nobody even got close. If you look at Jon Jones, Jon Jones has, you know, the tainted supplements, right? And whether or not you believe he actually took them or he didn't, everybody sort of knows my opinion. I'm on the side of like, okay, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And getting popped for steroids twice, right? Technically a third time with the picograms. I don't give Jon Jones the benefit of the doubt. But even with the steroids and all that, he's had kind of a close fight with Cormier, even though you could say he easily won it. He still lost 2 of those rounds. He had a really close fight with Gus. And then with Reyes, he's had a close fight. His Ovin St. Preux fight, when he got back after the steroids, or right before the steroids, he did not look very good either. And so that tells me that Jon at some point was vulnerable. The loss, I'm not really going to take that away from Jon. That was a disqualification. Technically, I think Jon Jones is still undefeated. But I think when you add all those things together, it rules Jon Jones out of the argument. Then if you look at the other guys that are up there on the list, right? Demetrius Johnson has some losses. George St. Pierre had losses in his career. He had a really close fight that he arguably lost against Johnny Hendricks before he sort of went on to retirement. Anderson Silva, of course, he had the broken leg against Weidman, has never been the same after that. You can even knock him for possibly the steroids after his leg broke. And even before that, he had quite a few losses and close fights as well. And so with all of that in mind, I think Khabib, far and above, is the GOAT. I guess the only knock against him is he only competed in 1 weight class. And if that's what you're going to say, okay, I agree with that. He did not compete in multiple weight classes. But at the same time, who else has dominated their weight class like Khabib has?
Jones actually chimed in himself. He was like, basically, hey, listen, I got 15 world titles in my back pocket. Khabib has 4. Do you think that plays into the argument? Again, an interesting discussion point I saw is when you look at the quality of opponents, you look at Khabib's last 3 opponents, Poirier, McGregor, obviously Gaethje. Those are huge wins in themselves. I know we wanted the Tony Ferguson fight, but I mean, Gaethje beat Ferguson. So what are we going to do? If you just look at stack them on top of each other, you would say, obviously Khabib should be better than Ferguson too. Another interesting fighter has entered that discussion as well. The last style bender, Israel Adesanya. And my thing on that one, and maybe I'm still bitter based off Adesanya's last fight, or not his last fight over Paulo Costa, but the previous one against Yoel Romero. I just don't like that when it comes to Israel, he's such a counter striker and he's so dependent on what his opponent is doing. I just would love to see a fighter, in terms of greatest of all time argument, be able to do multiple things and be able to push the tempo. And that's something I don't feel that Israel is able to do. And I'm not going to lie, I knock him a little bit for even the certain inappropriate behavior he had in the Paulo Costa fight. That kind of knocks him down in my book. It's a mental subliminal thing. I don't know if I want to see that fight again, to be honest, Paulo. But yeah, Aundre, your thoughts going back to it?
Yeah, going back to it, I think you're right. And something that I will give Jon Jones, I think he's actually it's hard to say this, right? Because I believe Khabib truly is the GOAT, but I think Jon Jones is the greatest talent of all time when it comes to MMA. I mean, just the sheer stuff that guy is able to do in the octagon is, you know, in a lot of ways more technical than whatever Khabib does, even though Khabib's at a very high technique when it comes to sticking to his game plan. But again, yeah, when it comes to the level of opponents, right, Jon's last few opponents, they haven't been the greatest. And Jon did have quite a few finishes of champions or former champions, right? Like we're looking at like Shogun Rua and, you know, Lyoto Machida and a lot of those guys, right? Rashad Evans, and Jon dismantled all of them. I think that would be maybe a knock against Khabib in that, like, how many former champs did he dismantle? Well, he's got a few with Conor McGregor. He's got, you know, Rafael Dos Anjos. Justin Gaethje technically was a champ from another organization, but Khabib doesn't have necessarily as many, like, I guess, grand finishes as you could say some of these other guys have. But at the same time, nobody was able to get past Khabib. So, you know, can you knock him when he's been one of the most dominant champs we've seen in recent history? When it comes to Israel Adesanya, I agree. I would like to see a little bit more overall mixed martial arts ability from Israel Adesanya. And you know, it's weird because, like we said, with Khabib, we give him props for sticking to his game plan and doing what works. And that's what Adesanya is doing, right? Is he's sticking to his game plan of, like, the guy has to come to me. I'm not going to go to the guy, you know, that wants to punch me in the face. But at the same time, like you said, like it sort of lacks the overall MMA sort of glow to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like it doesn't have, like, we haven't seen very impressive grappling ability from him, which he hasn't had to resort to. We haven't even seen like him going forward and pushing the pace. Like you said, it's all been just counter striking. And that's why for me, Israel Adesanya isn't up there yet. He also hasn't had the fights that Khabib has. I think Israel Adesanya is still in the teens, so he's not even to the 20s yet, right? Whereas Khabib is, you know, almost at 30 fights undefeated. And
I think Israel's actually 20-0 if I check.
Is he 20-0 now?
So he's got an even 20. And I know an interesting discussion point just to bring up here is people have thrown out the possibility of him versus Jon. Now, I know that is kind of a stretch. I know a lot of weird things are going on with Jon and the UFC right now and Dana and all of this. But Jon versus Israel, now that's something you want on the top of a marquee. Am I right?
It definitely is. It's definitely marketable, right? And if you're Dana, you're probably trying to get that done. My worry, though, is that you almost burn your star in Israel Adesanya, because I don't think there's any way he beats Jon Jones. Like, Israel Adesanya, being a counter striker, he uses a lot of his evasiveness and length to get out of the way and then strike from a distance. Can you really outstrike a distance match with Jon Jones? I don't think so.
Those long arms, too. I mean, you're right. When you look at both of those guys and what they do well and their body types, Jon matches up perfectly with Israel. And that's one of those things that you're always scared of when it comes to fighting, like putting your fighters, your star fighters, in positions where they could get their ass kicked. I mean, we were high on the Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley, and then he gets his ass kicked by Chito Vera, and bye. You know, like you just instantly drop him down the card. What would that do to Israel's career? Because Jon's not going to give you a rematch if he beats your ass. Yeah, so I mean,
nobody cares anymore, right? Everybody thought that Israel Adesanya is this great, you know, mystical fighter, and then you get your ass beat by Jon Jones. Like, nobody cares anymore.